Welcome to the Human Rights Roundtable, a podcast from the Human Rights Task Force here in Westwood, Massachusetts. I am your co-host and co-chair of the Human Rights Task Force, Melinda Garfield. I'm also the executive director of Westwood Media Center and the director of social media and AV for the town of Westwood. And I'm here with...
Hi, Danielle Sutton. I am the co-host and co-chair of the Human Rights Task Force in Westwood, also serve in the role of Youth and Family Services Director for the town. So we're here with Alix Stuart, a Westwood resident and parent here in town, member of the HRTF. Alix, can you tell us how you got involved with the HRTF?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me today, and also so thrilled to be part of the HRTF work. As you said, I'm a parent in town. I think in the course of the events of 2020, the murder of George Floyd really causing, myself and so many others to reconsider our responsibilities as suburban families. I had gotten involved in some work at my kids' schools, and then was also reaching out to Chris Coleman to see what we were doing as a town. And over the course of time, was fortunate enough to get connected with you and Melinda.
And so, Alix, you have children at different stages of development. Describe what it's like in your home in terms of having age-appropriate discussions around DEI and what they experience in school.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I feel like I've seen it evolve so much in the past 2 years. I think, again, going back to June 2020, it was a real catalyst for us to think we really need to talk about this with our kids. We need to let them know they live in a bubble, and that as wonderful it is to study, Martin Luther King during Black History Month and maybe 2 or 3 other kind of Black heroes, that there's so much more to that history, and that some of the inequities they've learned about are really still persisting. So I guess in our house that, conversation takes different courses with different kids. The elementary school kids get it at a different level, although surprisingly deep, honestly, than maybe the older kids. We bought Black Lives Matter t-shirts for the whole family as kind of a sign of unity. So that was something we could all share. But then at the schools, I've seen a real commitment at our elementary school at Sheehan. I'm so impressed with the teachers there. We have a task force of teachers that's taken it upon themselves to get more books into the classrooms that speak to the kids about diverse experiences, to really celebrate the holidays of everyone in the classroom, and even if there's no one in particular celebrating it, to at least educate the kids about holidays they might not have known about. There's so much more beyond what they were learning before. And then also to expand even beyond racial equity, to just realize everybody has a slightly different take on the world, and identities, are what people decide they are. And so, like in my daughter's 3rd grade class, they are doing a public service announcement, and they can choose different interests. One of them is the LGBTQIA ally group. One of them is the racial equity group. One is involving food security. It's a really wide range of interests, but it's nice to see that some topics that everybody was afraid to talk about 2 years ago are now, part of everyone's choice in the classroom.
It is great, and I think, that what you're describing, like the discussions at home and those opportunities at school, are part of how change and improvement happens in the community. What other ways do you see that we can make improvements in our community?
Yeah, I think for all of us, just being more open to hearing others' perspectives and having more community conversations where you're intentionally put into contact with people whose experiences are different than yours. I'm probably just as guilty of this as anyone, where it's just so easy to kind of get wrapped up with people who have common interests to you and common experiences, and not realize that there's so many rich experiences beyond that. So, that's, I guess, a very general statement, but creating more opportunities as a community to cross-pollinate ourselves, I think would be really valuable.
And on those same lines, another way to save the world, how would you suggest we bring people together to discuss these hard topics?
Yeah, I think, you've probably got 2 groups of people. One that would love to engage in these really controversial, inflammatory topics and maybe already have a point of view, they're interested. So, I mean, and I would personally love to have like a community conversation on critical race theory. Like, what does it mean? What are people afraid of? What are the proponents saying? I mean, it's like such a rich topic that people usually only educate themselves with headlines on. So I think there's a way to kind of collectively educate ourselves on some of these big topics. And I'm sure there are many more like that where we could pull in some experts, we could pull in some community representatives and just get a really like rich panel discussion going. And then I think there's another group of people that do not want to go anywhere near those topics, but still need a way to have their horizons expanded. And, there I think about just having maybe more neutral events like a community service day that really reaches out to all different communities within Westwood, or intergenerational conversations, or any kind of, way to meet others and see life through their eyes for even a half hour, I think could be really powerful.
How do you see the HRTF moving forward, bringing information and education to the community?
I think we could play a really powerful role as even an information platform, kind of an aggregator of information. Even just the basics, as we were talking about in our last meeting, of like, you often only see what's happening in your child's school if you happen to have a child in school. And so for people whose children are too young to be in school yet, or have aged out, or never had kids in school, you might have no idea what's happening in terms of some of these hate crimes that are pervasive, unfortunately. And so even just being a place where we provide the big picture and kind of keep watch and notice and like let people know that their actions are being observed, that somebody cares. I think there's that piece of being kind of a source of information and perhaps remediation, ideally, to help the people who are affected. And then I think there is this other piece of helping Westwood set a good tone at the top, working with our select board to help them understand, okay, what will make an impact? What do people need to hear from you to know this is a welcoming community? And it can be, I think, hard to have that vision when they're doing the day-to-day, and we can function as a little bit more of that strategic thinking piece for them of what's important to say when.
Mm-hmm.
Could you describe a little bit about your background and your profession, but also kind of weave in about what it's taught you, your profession, or your professional work? What has it taught you about how groups of people or communities can make progress in areas of human rights, diversity, equity, inclusion?
Yeah, so I work for a professional services company, and one big component of what we do is consulting to leaders, to groups of employees, and it's generally with the idea of coaching to higher performance. A big piece of that over recent years has become how to be a more inclusive leader and how to create a sense of belonging among your employees. I mean, this is a huge business issue, if nothing else, for employers. So I guess we have lots of data and lots of recommendations to share with clients, but I've also seen it firsthand in my workplace. I give them a lot of credit. I think when George Floyd's murder happened, it was like, first of all, no one knew what to do. And then some very brave colleagues who are people of color spoke out and said, I just want you to know, like, this is how life is for me as a Black person. And it was shocking. It was shocking to feel like someone I thought was kind of living a parallel life to myself actually fears for his life when he goes for a run at night and is worried about how his son is perceived. And this opened up a lot of conversations internally. And so I feel like we were kind of taking our own medicine in a way of learning what it means to really make space for others to tell their stories and to hear that and then think about how to thoughtfully respond. And so we see that with our clients too. I mean, it turns out what it takes to be an inclusive leader is pretty basic. Like, it's not rocket science. It's a lot about, first of all, developing your own self-awareness of your impact on people and understanding that just because you mean something a certain way doesn't mean it lands that way with someone else. And then it's making space to hear from others about their experience of the world, and to like, I think it comes down to like, in this context of racial issues, like, well, as a white person, you think, I'm not racist, I'm not treating anyone unfairly, so racism doesn't exist. And if you leave it at that, you're not being an inclusive leader. You have to make space for people who have different experiences to say, this is my reality, and whatever you intend, like, my life is about, navigating inequities and people who think the worst of me based on what I look. And so there's more complexity than that, but I think it's been, it's been really just interesting to be able to take a lot of data and analysis and realize like what contributes to a sense of belonging is something really in anyone's power, no matter what race you are or what background you are. It's we can all be inclusive.
I think that's wonderful to hear about that, and especially the way you summed it up, like, because I've said this before in our meetings, but it feels like, again, from like a human change perspective, an initial reaction that humans tend to have when they are faced with having to change behavior is like, it's all too much. I'm never going to be able to do it, in their own mind, right? Like, it's just too big. I'm never going to be able to like do all these things that people expect me to do in this situation. So I'm going to defend against what I'm hearing and say like, no, I didn't intend it that way, or that's not how it actually is. So I don't actually have to change, right? Like,
Right.
People around me have to change. So I think it's so great that you're able to help in your work, and then also here in the community, people come to that understanding that it's really actually accessible to anybody. And it's basic changes, and anybody can do it. And it's just getting started, and being open to the idea of doing it. It's great.
Yeah, thank you. So in tradition, we leave you all today with a quote. This one was picked in honor of the Westwood High School prom that just happened this past weekend. But the quote is from
Verna Myers.
Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And with that, we'd like to thank everyone for listening, and thank you, Alix, for joining us
Thanks,
today.
Alix.
Thank you for having me.
Please tune in next time for our next episode of the Human Rights Roundtable.